Some Universes Beyond sets are really my cup of tea.
Sauron's wrath will be terrible, his retribution swift.
Unfortunately, there's some that I'm just not that passionate about, and Fallout lands in that category. Now, while I might not be a huge Fallout fan, I just never really got into the video games. I do like what they've done with some of the cards from the upcoming Fallout set, so I thought today I'd take time and go over some cards that I thought were good ideas to add to your commander decks, and I'm going to be adding them to mine as well. So let's get started with the color white, and we'll go from there. The first white card that caught my attention was the Battle of Hoover Dam. For 3 and a white, it's an enchantment that says as it enters the battlefield, choose NCR or Legion. On the NCR side, you get at the beginning of your end step, return target creature card with mana value of 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Or Legion, whenever a creature you control dies, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Now, half this card is pretty decent on the NCR side, but there are other ways in white to get back 3 mana value cards that don't involve finality counters. What I want from this card is the Legion side, which has several uses in many different decks, making it a great pickup. In a plain +1/+1 counter deck, this just does its thing as creatures die, and that's fine. In a token deck, this can make a few of your decks into big chunky boys, and can be even used to set up a lethal by making one of your better creatures indestructible, then wiping away everything else to make the indestructible creature bigger, and everything that died with it goes for 2 more on that one creature, and then swinging into somebody's face with that newly enlarged creature. Then the main reason I like this is Teysa Karlov. This is a death trigger for her to double up, putting 4 +1/+1 counters on one of your creatures or 2 of them on 2 different creatures. I love that, and it's a permanent that's not likely to draw as much attention at first, and you might actually get several triggers off this before anyone wises up to what it can do. Then we have Gary Clone. For 1 and a white, it's a creature human citizen squad 2, and it says whenever it attacks, each creature you control named Gary Clone gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it is a 1/3. Now, if you watch my channel for a while, you know I like things that can break the 1 copy per deck restriction in singleton formats, and this does that in a self-contained package using the squad ability where you pay the 2 mana and you get additional copies of it for every 2 you pay in. But what's better is that the squad copies are tokens, and this is a white creature, which is one of the strongest colors for token multiplying. So pair this up with any of the token doublers or triplers that are available to us in the format, especially in a white-green based build. So you get 2 tokens per squad payment at minimum. And you can even do some kind of mana ramping and doubling to feed even more into the squad cost and just go absolutely crazy with this. And once you've done so, your opponents have to deal with this army of self-pumping attackers, of which I recommend ways of getting them haste and trample to make them into DIY ball lightning. Then we have an aura enchantment called Over Encumbered. For 1 and a white, enchant opponent. When it enters the battlefield, the enchanted opponent creates a clue, a food, and a junk token. And at the beginning of combat on the enchanted opponent's turn, that player may pay 1 for each artifact they control, and if they don't, their creatures can't attack this combat. Now, this thing's pretty nuts. Not only does it give them 3 artifacts that they have to pay into to get rid of, but most opponents have several mana rocks, equipment, and other ancillary artifacts that are going to make the taxation on this thing really hard and force your opponent to choose what they want to do, either attack or bide their time casting spells first. But if you really want to be pure evil, pair this thing with Mycosynth Lattice. Now, think about that one for just 1 second. You do that, and the enchanted opponent will be locked out of attacking until they can get rid of the enchantment or the lattice, because they will have more total permanents that are artifacts than lands in order to pay the tax. The only way I can see out of this that's, they had to run mana doubling like a Mirari's Wake or something similar to that to have enough mana to pay their way through this, and not everyone has that kind of stuff available. This is a very nasty combo with this card. Then we have another squad creature that I really like, Securitron Squadron. For 1 and a white, it's a robot that says Squad 3. And whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it's a 2/2. Now, this one's a little different than the Gary clone. Instead of self-buffing itself on the attack, the Securitron Squadron buffs any creature tokens coming into play, and you keep that buff for the rest of the time they're on the board, including the squad tokens that were created off of this. They will all come into play and see each other and put a +1/+1 counter on each token for however many of them you created with the squad ability. And this escalates in any kind of token doublers or counter doubling effects. So green would be a good color once again to put alongside this with something like Doubling Season, which not only doubles the tokens coming in, it'll double the counters going on the creatures as this stuff resolves. And then any token you make after this is all down and on the board will get a counter for each copy of this you've already created. So I want to try this out and see how many times I can get copies of this with doubled counters. For now, let's move over to blue, starting with Jason Bright Glowing Prophet. For 2 and a blue, you get a zombie mutant advisor that says whenever a zombie or a mutant you control dies, if it was different from its base power, draw a card. It has an activated ability called Come Fly With Me. Pay 2 and sack a creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control and it gains flying until end of turn, and he is a 2/3. Now this is our first legendary creature that I feel is worth a pickup, and Jason Bright here slots into just about any existing zombie deck that you have blue in, because zombies are almost never their base power, because the creature type is one of the ones that has the most Lords cards that give buffs to the power and toughness of zombie creatures. And it makes it a really easy way to net cards off of this. And I'm really wanting to try this with the Decayed Zombie tokens from Midnight Hunt, because even if they survive the combat, they sacrifice themselves after the combat's over with. And as long as you have any Lord cards sitting there on the board, each time they die, no matter how they die, you're going to get a card off of them. And this also applies anytime you just want to feed them into a sacrifice engine as well, creating a draw on demand with Jason Bright on the field. And this makes a great addition to like a Will Helt the Rot Cleaver deck, or a Scarab God deck, or a Gissin and Geralf deck. The other blue card that I'm really interested here is Rad Storm. For 3 and a blue, it's an instant with Storm, and Proliferate is what it does. So every copy of spells you've played prior in this turn, including your opponents as well, when you cast Rad Storm, you're going to get a copy of it, and it's going to proliferate however many copies are made off of that Storm ability. So Proliferate is a very powerful ability, and when it's paired with Storm doing this stuff, it can probably do some pretty nutty things. I like this for a deck that can cast several cheap cantrips, or create a rather large amount of mana to chain cast into Rad Storm. So what kind of decks would really want this? Well, Super Friends decks, +1/+1 counter decks, poison decks. There's even the new Rad counters from Fallout that would love to have this card, which is why it comes in a deck, I think, that deals with the Rad counters. Rad counters cause a trigger that at the beginning of the first main phase, you mill cards equal to the number of Rad counters on you, and then you lose life equal to the number of non-land cards that got milled in, and then that many Rad counters come off of you. So being able to proliferate some of them back onto your opponent and do that multiple times can do a lot of damage and mess with somebody's deck drastically, unless they're on a graveyard strategy deck, which you might not want to proliferate their counters. So as I said, that was the blue cards I was interested. Not much going on there. So let's go on to the black cards. First up is an Infinite Engine combo that I spotted, and that is Feral Ghoul. For 2 and a black, zombie mutant with Menace that says whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on the Feral Ghoul, and when the Ghoul dies, each opponent gets a number of Rad counters equal to its power, and it starts out as a 2/2. A 2/2 for 3 mana isn't much to look at these days, but it's a zombie that can grow to become a real problem over time if you want to slow roll it. But it can also be slotted into something like Taste of Karlov or with Roaming Throne, so that you get double the counters when things die, and its own death trigger will be doubled as well. Or you can just go absolutely nuts with this thing and combo kill the board. This is why I said this is kind of a combo engine. With a Gravecrawler and a Phyrexian Altar, you just infinitely sacrifice the Gravecrawler to the altar. You use the black mana you create off of that to recast the Crawler, and you just do that over and over while the Ghoul is sitting there. And every time you sacrifice the Crawler, it's going to create, this Ghoul getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually you put enough counters on it, and then you just throw it into the altar and sacrifice it. And all of your opponents get so many Rad counters that they're either going to deck out, or they're going to get blown up by the Rad counter damage ticking off every time their non-lands hit the graveyard. So either way, you win. Then we have a black legendary zombie I want to kind of work around, and I think I'm going to try to build a deck around this. This is Hancock Ghoulish Mare. For 2 and a black, zombie mutant advisor. Each other creature you control that's a zombie or a mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on Hancock Ghoulish Mare. And it has Undying, so when it dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, it returns to the battlefield with a counter on it. So this seems kind of counterintuitive. You want it to die in order to get it to actually do anything other than being a 3 mana 2/1. But we do have access to cards that can actually add counters to this thing. And it's an interesting way to do a zombie lord, rather than just saying, okay, all zombies get +1/+1 or +2/+2 or whatever. You get a scaling effect zombie lord by however many counters you get on this. And once you get one counter on there, you can play proliferate spells and the things like that to increase the amount. And then your zombies just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think this is better than almost any zombie lord card they've ever printed in the game. So just so we don't hijack this part of the video any longer for this one entry, I do plan on doing a deck tech for this to maximize Hancock as a commander in a deck. And then the last black card of interest to me is Nuclear Fallout. For X black, you get a sorcery that says each creature gets twice X minus X until end of turn. Each player gets X rad counters. So this is a flexible black board wipe that can also act as a preemptive creature kill via the mill off the rad counters and a delayed black fireball with the damage off of those rad counters. So yeah, this has a lot of things going for it. You could simply play it as creature removal, but it's nice and scalable because usually minus X spells are tied to a specific cost. 3 mana for a -2/2 like Cry of the Carnarium, or -4 mana for a -4/4 like Languish, those kind of things. And this can be cast for these lower amounts at comparable cost to those existing spells. 2 into the X is a Languish, 1 into the X is a Cry of the Carnarium. So you get those things, but then you can go even bigger and tear down stuff. So if somebody's playing like Avacyn, you can use this at 4 mana into the X, and that Avacyn and anything else that's 8 or lower gets just completely blown up. I love the ability to go around indestructible, and this is a great way to do it. And then you can also just play it as a black burn spell where you just do like black drain effects and damage your opponents and things like that. And then you just dump a bunch of mana into this, and then you use the mill effect off of it to burn your opponents down. So, or maybe you just want to use this into like a black milling deck even, and just do like blue-black mill, and this is just a board clear as like the gravy on top that you can just use that secondary effect to mill them down. So black had some nice hits. Let's see what the red color has for us in here. First up is Grim Reaper Sprint. For 4 and a red, it's an enchantment aura with Morbid. It costs 3 less to cast if a creature died this turn. Enchant creature, when it enters the battlefield, untap each creature you control. If it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. The enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has haste. I love extra combat cards, and this one is no exception. And the nice part here is that you're probably going to get this thing on the cheap because you're going to probably swing, lose a creature in combat, or have some way of sacrificing a creature so that when you put this on there, it's going to cost 2 mana instead of the 5 mana, and you're going to get to swing again. And then most of the time, you're going to be playing the 4+ mana for this similar type effect with any other card. So 2 mana is a nice treat. Just remember, this is one of the extra combat cards where there is not an additional main phase after the combat. Some are rewarded to do that, this one is not. The other red card that caught my attention is Wild Wasteland. For 2 and a red, an enchantment, skip your draw step at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. Red finally gets a Necropotence variant at 3 mana, skip your draw step, but in this case, instead of paying life to draw the cards, you get to exile the top 2 cards and you can cast them right away or lose them in true red fashion. And it's a card that I would run in most red decks, but I just wouldn't drop it at any time. I would have to time it out where I'm dropping to make sure I have enough mana to cast my spells, so I'm not losing my best stuff early on into exile. So for right now, I love this card, but I also see good uses in one particular commander that came in the Aftermath set, and that is Pia Nalaar, Consul of Revival. You to play lands and spells from exile, and when you do, you're able to go ahead and get Thopters off of her. So, you exile, say you land and something else, you play your land off of the exile, there's a Thopter, play the other spell that came off of it, there's another Thopter, and you just keep churning along with her abilities. So this is really good in that particular deck. Now it's time to move on to the green cards that caught my attention. First up is Big Horner Rancher. For 4 and a green, it's a human ranger with vigilance. Tap at an amount of green equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, or you can sacrifice the rancher to gain life equal to the greatest toughness among other creatures you control. So, 2/5. So bare minimum, you're going to be tapping for 2 mana when this taps, but it's 5 mana. You want big stuff on the board. And green, of course, is the color of, for big creatures. So anything that we can do here to produce a lot of mana like this is highly abusable with the right cards. And in this particular case, we just need a copy of Staff of Domination and just another creature with a minimum of 5 power on the board. You tap the rancher, you add 5 green, use 3 of it to untap the rancher with the staff, pay 1 to untap the staff itself. You leave yourself with 1 green mana floating. Rinse and repeat, infinite green mana to do something with. And it's very splashable outside of mono green decks since it only has 1 green pip in its cost. So something like the 5-color Omnath would love this to make all that green into black mana, or have access to other color spells to dump said infinite mana into. Then we have one of the rare green equipment cards that are actually pretty good. This is Power Fist. For 1 and a green artifact equipment, equipped creature has trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it, and it equips for 2. Counter adding onto creatures like this usually involves an aura of some sort, which is just asking for you to get 2 for 1 by a kill or an exile spell. And it also becomes a one-shot use item in the game, and then when the creature dies or you've locked in on that creature, you can't move it around. Power Fist, however, is a cheap equipment with a reasonable equip cost to get it online quickly and start buffing up a creature. And then if you want to bulk up something else later, you can move it over to another creature to do the same thing to, or if that first creature got destroyed, you can move it to a new creature and not lose it like you do with the auras. Any kind of +1/+1 counter strategy deck is going to want this thing, and I think it's a great card even if you're not heavily invested in counters but just like smashing face. The last green card that I really liked here is Watchful Radstag. For 2 and a green, Elk Mutant with Evolve, and whenever it evolves, you create a token copy of it, and it's a 2/2. The things that can copy themselves are right up my alley, and once again, using green, we're going to be very able to evolve this multiple times, several times over, and coupled with some token doublers, this elk could load your board up very quickly and very rapidly by multiplying and growing an army of elk, and then like any kind of green-based token strategy should look to add this to their lineup. Next up is the multicolored cards. Let's see what we got here that is worth a pickup. Let's start with Alpha Deathclaw. For 4, a black and a green, you get a lizard mutant with Menace and Trample that when it enters the battlefield or becomes monstrous, destroy target permanent, and it becomes monstrous by paying a 5 black and a green. You put 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and it becomes monstrous. And it's a 6/6 to start with. This is color locked, but is a 1 mana cheaper Meteor Golem, but with a much better body to go along with that color lock. And it can be reused with the monstrous ability, allowing you to blow up something else along the way and make it even bigger. This is really good stuff in a color that can also bring it back for recasting or reanimating it straight out of the graveyard to use it over again and again. Staying in the black-green color combination, we have a really nice piece of removal in Atomize. For 2, a black and a green, and it's an instant that says destroy target non-land permanent, proliferate. So 4 mana to destroy any kind of non-land permanent is already pretty good all by itself, but stapling on a relevant keyword to it, yeah, that makes it a pretty good thing as long as you have some kind of counters in your deck that you would like to proliferate as the icing to this cakey goodness. Now, a legendary creature has to speak to me before I'll ever consider brainstorming a deck around it, and that's what our next card does here in the multicolored cards. Colonel Autumn. For 1, a white and a black, it's a human soldier with lifelink and exploit. It grants exploit to all your other legendary creatures that you control, and whenever a creature you control exploits a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and it's a 2/3. Exploit is a seriously underrated ability in the game, and that can add up over the course of an entire game, but in this case, your Legends gang and adding in some older exploit cards, you can really have a potent drain and gain deck that can finish off your opponents with some fat creatures that just got bigger every time you use those exploits. And I'm already tossing this one around, and there will be a tech on it in the coming weeks. For now, let's get away from the black tinted legends and let's take a look at Sean, Father of the Synths. For 3, a blue and a red, you get a human scientist that says whenever you attack, you may create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of a target attacking legendary creature you control other than Sean, except for it's not legendary and it's a synth artifact creature in addition to its other types. When Sean leaves the battlefield, exile all synth tokens you control. Red-blue legends, yeah, that could be a different way to try something here, and Sean would work out to be a good way to go about it. Combine that with some of the cloning tricks like Spark Double and Irenicus Vial Duplication, and you have a recipe to do some really silly stuff with multiple copies of Sean on the board. And the last of the multicolor cards that interests me from this is 3-Dog Galaxy News DJ. For 1, a red and a white, it's a human bard that says whenever you attack, you may pay 2 colorless and sacrifice an aura attached to 3-Dog Galaxy News DJ. When you sack an aura this way, for each other attacking creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that aura attached to that creature. Now, if you've watched my channel long enough, you may have seen videos on Yenna, Calyx, and Mazzy, which were all about auras and copying them and stacking them up. This guy fits right in that vein, but could be even stronger. Now, imagine this. Suit him up with an All That Glitters, and you attack with multiple creatures, and you pay in and sack that All That Glitters off of him, which then sees all the other stuff, and then it's going to make multiple copies of All That Glitters, which then see all those enchantments on the board and makes all your attackers suddenly very large, and your opponents are going to be in a lot of hurt when those come crashing in. Yeah, I can see some really silly stuff happening with this guy. Then of the artifacts in this set, let's start off with Camp or CAMP, however you want to pronounce this one. For 3 colorless, you get an artifact Fortification. We haven't seen this kind of thing, I think, since Future Sight. Whenever a fortified land is tapped for mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever a fortified land is tapped for mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If that creature shares a color with the mana that the land produced, create a junk token. And then the Fortify is a 3 colorless to attach it to a land. You can only do it at sorcery speed. So for 3 mana, it doesn't do anything. You have to pay 6 total to get it to do something. But once you've paid over the course of at least 1, if not 2 turns, anytime that land gets tapped, as long as you're going to get to put a counter on something, and then if they share colors, you get a junk token while you're at it to feed into things and, exile the top card of your library and do just all kinds of dumb little stuff to it. Then we have Nuka-Cola Vending Machine. For 3 colorless, we have an artifact that says pay 1 and tap, create a food token, and whenever you sacrifice a food, create a tapped treasure token. The Karlov Manor Deep Clue Sea deck would actually love to have this thing to supplement its artifact token creation. My Chatterfang deck would love to have this since you would get a scroll off the food token that you create and the treasure coming in after you've sacked the token. It even slots really well into the Food and Fellowship Lord of the Rings Precon. It would add a pretty good card to that as well. This card can see various modes of play, and I like that, and I'm planning on trying it out in all kinds of stuff. Then we have the lands that they've included here, and finally, they've completed a cycle over 20 years in the making from the Odyssey set. They introduced what was originally known as the Filter Lands back then, but are now called the Signet Lands because they now act just like the Guild Signets from Ravnica, where you pay any color to produce 2 mana from that. So these were originally only allied color signets. Now we get the enemy color ones in this set. So we have Desolate Mire tapping for black and white, Fairish Lake taps for red and blue, Overflowing Basin taps for blue and green, Sunscorched Divide taps for red and white, and Viridescent Bog taps for black and green. So that does it for the brand new cards that are coming in the precons and the collector's boosters. So what about the rest of the stuff? What about the reprints? Well, let's take a look at some reprints that I like seeing here because some of them are quite expensive, even though they've been recently reprinted already. The cards that I like most that got reprinted are as follows. I'm not going to go over the cards in detail, but I'm going to list them off and why I like them. First up is Inexorable Tide. Now, this is one hell of a good reprint because currently it's going for around $14 and is a great card with any +1/+1 counters deck. Then we have Deadly Dispute because somehow this is still a $2 to $3 card, so a reprint here is nice to make it more affordable. Same thing for Pitiless Plunderer. This was once a $12 uncommon and it was reprinted into the Lost Caverns Precon and it showed up as a special guest in the list slots for the Lost Caverns packs. But it's still sitting around $5 to $6 even after those 2 reprints recently, so it's nice to see it here as well. Another Lost Caverns reprint that is getting reprinted here is Branching Evolution. It just recently got that in the Merfolk Precon, but it's still sitting around $10, so this should dent that pretty nicely. Also in green, we have Guardian Project. Now, this thing just saw a reprint in Ravnica Remastered, and the card is still sitting around $12. So more reprints for this one should help availability and get it into the hands of more players. Then we have a reprint that has not seen any reprints since its original printing in Apocalypse, Foreverent Charge. The original card here spiked really hard when Ishin Two Heavens is one release because this gets doubled with Ishin's attack trigger. So it's nice to see this finally getting a new reprinting and making it a little more affordable. Because really, I don't like it when cards have artificial scarcity just because they've never been reprinted since, 20 plus years ago when they're available for a reprint. And then last but not least, we have another reprint of Lightning Greaves, which is great because no matter how many times this thing has been reprinted, and it's been more than a dozen times since its first printing back in the Mirrodin block, it still holds value at $5 or more as you look at the pricing on this card. So that does it for the Fallout cards that I think are good pickups and things that I'm personally going to pick up for my collection. So what did you guys think? What are you looking forward to picking up? What are you going to do? Are you going to buy the full precons? Are you going to buy select precons? Or are you just going to pick up singles that you would like? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.